Hey there, Titans, and welcome back to another Titan Academy video. Today we'll be talking about how to make your portal or form or any kind of project have draft capabilities. Now, there are two different types of saving drafts in Titan. We can either push the data and push impartial data to Salesforce and have that be brought back at any point and pre-populate your form, and in a previous video I've shown you exactly how to do that. Today we'll be focusing on a different type of draft, which is using our package in Salesforce and an object in our package called My Submissions. And there you'll be able to store data as a JSON and bring that data from the JSON back into your project. Let's get started. So I've got a simple form here, and it's the same form I've been using in previous videos to show how to save draft by pushing the data to Salesforce. Today, we're showing how to do it using our submission actions. And we've got a account that we're going to try to set up, a contact that we're going to try to set up, and finally a file push at the end. Now, in order to make this work, we're going to also add a button, and we can do this at each step of the process like I showed in a previous video. In this video, I'm going to show it a little bit differently. I'm just going to use an extra button over here called Save as Draft. And this will allow my end user to save at any point when they haven't yet completed the form entirely. They can save this as draft and it will bring the data right back into their form. Now, the other thing that I just want to point out that we're using today is we're going to use SmartV, and that is in order to secure our form, make sure it's as secure as possible, and it will ensure that the right person is logging in and that when we repopulate those details, we're making sure that we're repopulating the correct details for the correct individual who is using our project. Now, I'm going to go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a variable, and this is a project level variable, and I'm going to call this variable, let's call it submission ID, and this is going to be a super important variable that we're going to need throughout our project. And I'm going to head back over to SmartV, and based on the person who's logging in, and just to remind you here what we've got set up, we're doing this based on the contact and he's logging in using his email. We also have 2FA set up. I'm actually going to turn it off. In general, we do recommend using this. I'm just going to turn it off for the video just so that it's a bit shorter. But in general, we highly recommend using 2FA. It makes your form or portal or whatever it might be much more secure. We've also got a registration page, and that's going to come in handy here. And I'm passing a few parameters. I'm going to pass my submission ID from my contact over to the submission ID that I've got on my form. All right, excellent. Now, the next thing I need to do is set up the load, and this is how we store the submission data in our package in Salesforce. So I'm going to click on my button, and I'm going to head over to submission. And now this is a submission action. It's different than the submission on the push, which we've discussed in a previous video. This is specifically for storing draft data. And I'm going to go ahead and run a store action. Now you can create or update. In this case, I'm going to just create and keep on updating my contact with the same submission ID. So I'm storing and I'm creating. And I just want to do everything on the entire page. Now notice automatically it will give me those tags for my JSON. You can write something different here. You don't need to keep the static text that we have here, but it will usually work if you just use the default text that you have here. You just need to remember that whenever you load back, that your tags match exactly between store and load. So I'm just going to leave it as the default here. And as you can see, the company is being stored in this text company tag and etc. So let's go ahead and store that. And I'm going to return the submission ID to this variable. We can also return the entire JSON into our project, and there are some use cases where you might want to do that. For now, I'm not going to do this, but keep in mind that once you create that JSON in Salesforce, we can store back that JSON in a variable in your project. You can email that JSON, you can send it elsewhere, and it might be helpful. So let's just write here, store data from form, which is essentially just drafting it. And this can be really helpful, especially when we don't want to store partial data in Salesforce. We want to make sure that we're only storing the data in our objects in Salesforce at the very end, and until then, we have no real purpose of doing that. So let's go ahead and also set up our push for the very end here. And we have here just a file push, but we need a push account, contact, and file. And we also needed this to be done in a custom overorder of execution. So I've already got these pushes set up. We're not going to go too deep into that into the video, but this is a final push that's going to push all of my data when it's actually complete into Salesforce. Excellent. All right, so we've got our store. Now we need our load. So in order to run the load, we need a couple of things. First of all, we need to make sure that we're storing that submission ID in our contact in Salesforce or somewhere handy so that we can actually load back the correct submission. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a new push. And this is a push to my contact. And I'm going to go ahead and update my contact. I don't want to create, I only want to update here. And I want to update the contact ID that my user logged in with. So whatever contact logs in, that's who I'm updating. And I'm going to update their submission ID field with my submission ID that's on my project. So just to remind you, and let's give this a good description, we'll say store sub ID in Salesforce. So let's review the process of what we're actually trying to accomplish here. Essentially, we're going to store all the data in a JSON in Salesforce in the Titan package. We'll get a submission ID for that record in Salesforce. Then we'll push that ID to the contact in Salesforce so that next time this contact logs in, we're going to be able to load back the data. All right, so now let's focus on loading the data. I'm going to run over to my page actions here by going to the 3 dots next to my page and configure actions. And I want this to happen every time I access my page. And I'm going to go ahead and run a submission action again. And this time it'll be a load. And my submission ID needs to be the ID that's being populated in this global variable. Now, just to remind you, this global variable gets populated when I run a submission store, but it also gets populated on my SmartV. When my user logs in through SmartV, I'm passing this value of submission ID from the contact to this variable. So once I log in, I should have this variable populated, and I should be able to load all the data from that project. Now, in terms of project ID, I can just grab that right here. I could also use a variable, or I could say current project. And what do I want to load? I want to load everything on this page. And as you can see, my tags are the exact same as they were when we ran the store. All right, so here we're saying load data back to form. Excellent. All right, so we're basically all set. Let's run it. Okay, so first thing, I'm just going to create a brand new contact. So I'm going to use the sign up form. Keep in mind, everything you're seeing fully customizable can be done with any object, not just contact. That's just my example for right now. All right, so I'm just going to do first name as Larry. And let's put my email in. Let's give it a bit of a different email. I'll just grab that. And we'll go ahead and log in. Now, again, I didn't use 2FA, but best practice would be to use 2FA here. Okay, let's fill in some details. Let's say the best company and industry. Let's leave it like this for now, and we'll save as a draft. All right, cool. So let's just check out debug for a second. We could already see we've got that submission ID, and so that's stored in Salesforce. And we can assume that's also already been pushed to our contact. Let's see if that's really the case. I'm going to refresh, which will log me out of SmartV, and that's because I've turned off the session here. You don't have to turn off the session, just doing it for the video so that it will log me out immediately. So I'm logged out. I'm going to log back in. And what I expect to happen is, just like we see here, that load ran and it brought back the data from account. Let's fill out some more fields. We'll try it again. And some first name, and we can also do some last name, and we'll save this as draft. Okay, let's head over one more time into this. We'll log back in, and notice those new details are all here. And of course, if I were to continue on and push everything to Salesforce in the end, when I'm finally completed, we can actually push all those data to the appropriate objects, that being account and contact in this case, as well as a file that's related, but we'll skip that for now. The main point here is the ability to save as draft and be able to pull that back in. Now, I just want to mention a couple of other ways that this can be done. We've demonstrated one way where we pushed it to Salesforce, where we pushed the submission ID to Salesforce. If you don't want to push that submission ID to Salesforce, you can also create a URL to the portal with a concatenated variable of submission ID in the URL with that submission ID and send that to your end user. So this way there's a unique URL that they can use to log in. It's not the most secure way to do it necessarily, but you can do that as well. again, many different ways to do this. Doesn't need to be with a button that says save as draft. You can choose to save as draft each time they click on that next button. So we could have set that up right over here, that it would first save as draft and then go next on the stepper. Many ways to do this, but very, very useful thing to be able to use our submissions, save those in draft. Final thing I'm just going to show you is what happens on the Salesforce side when we do this. And you can see that essentially we're creating a My Submission record along with a content version record. This is the record of the submission itself. And here you have the JSON attached to or associated with that record, which will allow you to essentially repopulate your form. And you can do a lot with this JSON. You don't have to bring it back into Titan. You can parse it out in Salesforce. You can parse it out using different software. But that's just to give you a taste of how to use the My Submission action. And that's how it's done.